We're going to put you front and center since we have a Zoom audience as well. Did you turn on your mic?
Is it on now?
Yes, it's
All
on.
right, we're on.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you all so much.
It's
This
great.
is my first time back in school.
First time back in school.
Yeah.
This is, do you speak in front of college audiences often?
No, so this is totally the first time I've been back in university setting since I went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, and that was a rough 4 years. But yeah, it's good to be back.
That's great to hear, truly. Like, I guarantee in a year or two, you're gonna say, that person spoke in our class, and you're gonna see this sort of career take off because you can feel it happening with just the following and who listens and follow his advice. So these are undergrad students, except for one graduate music student, and they're from all majors. Half of them are business majors, but half is everything else, so the humanities and sciences, and computer science, and you have student athletes and musicians, and you have a lot of students apparently at Coachella, which is never a great for, but that's just the nature of things. We're going to talk about three things primarily.
Sure.
A little bit about your background, so they have some context, and then we'll talk about the topics in your book, Clarity and Connection. And then we typically go into mindset and lessons. I have a feeling for you that number 2 and number 3 are going to blend in. And I'm going to get them asking a lot of questions pretty quickly. Is that all right?
That sounds fantastic.
All right.
Yeah.
And if there's anything you want to know, you feel free to just fire back at them and ask them questions.
Sure.
They're waiting.
I'm
for us.
already feeling comfortable. Yeah, this is
Good.
great.
Good. So where were you born and at what age did you immigrate to the US?
I was born in Guayaquil. Is anybody here from South America or descendants from South America? A few of us. Yeah, so I was born in Ecuador. The most populous city in Ecuador is Guayaquil. The capital is Quito. And Guayaquil is a really poor city, super, super poor. Even if you're not like severely struggling, you're still super poor. So my family, my mom and dad decided that there just wasn't any real opportunity there for them. So they moved us in 1992 to Boston, Massachusetts. Well, first we landed in New York City. We were there for 2 weeks, and my mom was like, "We gotta get the hell out of here." So I grew up in Boston.
Sorry. So grew up at what age did you go?
4.
Okay.
4 years old.
So primarily raised in the US.
Yeah, very American. Yeah.
Any early childhood challenges or aspirations?
Yeah, I think the primary challenge was poverty. I mean, being poor in the United States is extremely difficult and traumatizing. I think that's like one form of trauma that's very rarely spoken about. And when I look back at my own history, like I was very fortunate that even though childhood itself was a constant struggle because of the pressures of poverty, I was fortunate to have fantastic parents. You know, I think they themselves, you know, we're all learning this like language of trauma and how to heal ourselves and how to better sort of associate with the past pain that we carry so that we can alleviate it. And my parents themselves, they had a lot of struggles that they went through. So we didn't really know how to connect on that deeper level, but even so, it was very clear that the love was there, that they loved us a lot, and they showed that love by how hard they worked. Yeah.
It's interesting that you know, people who grow up poor, I include myself in that group, and I didn't reflect on it. I just wanted to change it more than anything, you know, especially I came to this university and, you know, you come from a poor background to this university, and even though this is no longer the stereotype, everybody seemed rich and good looking.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just was like so intimidating to come from a poor background. So I just decided like, I want to be rich.
Right.
I want to be like that.
Yeah.
I live like that. Whereas you reflected more on sort of the deeper issues. When you talk about an aha moment, how old were you when you had this aha moment that you decided you wanted to delve into this subject area and learn more about it?
Well, it took a while. It took like it wasn't until I was, I think about 23, like right after college, when I realized that healing was even possible. And that sort of cascaded into me continuing to do more silent 10-day meditation courses and just coming out of them and really checking in with myself and being like, do you actually feel better or are you making this up? Because this was, you know, we're talking 2011, 2012, where this was before wellness was even a thing, before Instagram was even popular. This was when like the very beginnings of sort of the idea of self-love, I think, has been around probably since the 80s, but it didn't really become popular until like 2015. So I didn't really have a like mental map of how healing was even real. So when I was going through that journey myself, I was just shocked that you could actually feel better.
And so so your realization was through meditation?
That's
Or
right.
direction?
Yeah. It was after it was after my third silent 10-day course, like at the very end of it, I knew that I was undoubtedly on a good path, that even though I had so much more to heal, like I wasn't totally wise or anything like that. There was nothing special about the healing process that I was going through. I just realized that it was real. That motivated me into sharing. You know, I knew, I was like, I need to pick up the pen. I need to start writing, because if healing is real for me, then it is probably real for other people as well. It can happen. So
Is the process of writing healing?
I think it's, in some ways, I think it can be for a lot of people, because like the different paths of healing are so varied. Like some people find so much healing in journaling. I think for me, healing happens through like feeling what's actually happening in the body. But writing itself, yeah, can be quite powerful.
What does your pen name mean?
Oh, Young Pueblo. Young Pueblo is like the coming together of my Americanness and Ecuadorianness. So like, it just means young people. Pueblo in Ecuador is, Pueblo itself in Spanish has so many different definitions, but for us, it means like the masses of impoverished people. When I started meditating, I realized that all of us as a human collective, we're super young. Like we can't do the basic fundamental things of cleaning up after ourselves, not hitting each other. We don't know how to share with each other. We don't know how to be honest with each other or how to be kind with each other. And we're talking like at the global scale. We struggle at these things very much so. So when I started, realizing that, it hit me that we're all very young. Yeah, we're young people.
Your first book is entitled Inward.
Yep.
What is the importance of looking inward, especially your students that are mainly 18 to 22 years old at this inflection point in their life, some graduating this year and starting their first full-time jobs?
Yeah, I think it's critical to look inward, because you want to make sure that what you're aspiring to is actually genuine. It's not just what society like encoded in your mind. When I went to university, I majored in economics. I'm really glad that I majored in economics, but I thought I was going to be an investment banker. Because like you, like I was so poor, I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to pull my family out of poverty. My dad worked in a supermarket, my mom cleaned houses. So like seeing the struggle of living in America, being a part of that, I knew that was, that needed to change. So I thought, okay, the best route would be finance. But, after working in a bank for 1 month, I was like, this is hell. Like, I gotta get out of here. So I did.
You're inspired. Is self-awareness, I looked at they're not chapters, but they're sections of clarity and connection. Is self-awareness the first step in healing and emotional growth? What are some concrete ways we can progress towards a higher self-awareness? And what are the benefits of being self-aware?
Yeah, self-awareness is massive. I think self-awareness is based on honesty. If you're able to be radically honest with yourself, first and foremost, then you're going to be able to reflect properly. And when you start being able to ask yourself the hard questions, to be able to feel the hard feelings that you're running away from, then that's like your entry point into this internal landscape that you carry within you. One thing that's important to realize is that every time that you react, when you're having a very strong emotion, or when you're sort of rolling in anger, rolling in jealousy, rolling in some sort of tension or another, that leaves an imprint in your mind, in the subconscious. So you're more predisposed to feel that again and again. When you I think the struggle that I went through when I was in college was that I kept trying to use pleasure as an avenue to run away from myself. So I was like constantly smoking weed, constantly going out to parties. I was just going out all the time. And just so that I wouldn't have to spend time with myself. And when college was over and I was by myself, my friends lived in New York and they lived in LA, and they're, and I'm in Boston, and I'm like, shit, this is horrible. Like, I feel terrible. that's when it all really started coalescing that I needed help.
I want to circle back when we talk about trauma.
Sure.
But for now, how do you know, so we talked about being sort of self-aware as a means to getting more deeply connected to ourselves,
Yeah.
to our community, to relationships to other people. How do you know, what are some of the telltale signs when you are disconnected and struggling? So we had pages from your book ready to go.
Yeah, yeah.
But if we put them up on the screen, that's all they see on Zoom, and I'd rather have them see you. So
No,
I'm
that's
not going to
fine,
share
yeah.
those pages. So you know them already.
I think probably the key signs that you're disconnected with yourself is that there's just so much friction in your friendships and in your intimate relationships and with family members. And that oftentimes, instead of you taking some sort of ownership, like of course there are going to be people, difficult people in your life who will cause you agitation and struggle or even trauma, but a lot of the time, it's probably half your fault too. So owning that fact and realizing that, okay, I'm causing difficulty, then that's a sign of self-awareness. But if there is no self-awareness, if you're disconnected from yourself, you're constantly going to be pointing the finger outward and being like, this person did that, this person did that. And then that's a really tough way to live, because then you're constantly taking your power outside of you. And now don't get me wrong, like I want to own the fact that there is a lot of difficult people that may cause you a lot of genuine pain, who may have even traumatized you. That's totally valid. But at the same time, it's also equally important to reclaim your power and understand that a lot of the misery that you experience in your own mind is caused by the way that you react, the way that you perceive things.
So if we're disconnected and struggling, what will we notice about our expectations, our presence in the moment, our level of satisfaction, our ability to focus, and our ability to feel satisfied?
I think it's oftentimes like that's when sort of the dominant culture will just sort of take over your mind. And I didn't know myself enough to realize that there was a creative side to myself. I just thought, I gotta, go into finance and do this thing to pull my family out of poverty. But if I had taken the time to look inward, then I wouldn't have immediately just accepted what was coming into me. But I think that's one of the biggest signs that your self-awareness is actually developing, when you can start having that courage to be like, okay, I see what's popular on TV, I see what everyone else is doing, but what is genuine to me? Like what would actually feel fulfilling?
I want to talk about attachment. In the just the one clip I just played about the quote from the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
It was about attachment. What is attachment and what is not attachment, and what is negative about attachment? Because there's some things about attachment that can be good, but if you can discern what is attachment and why it can be bad.
So one important thing to premise that with is understanding that attachment, in the sense that the person was just talking about in regards to the Bhagavad Gita, which is similar to the way that I talk about it in my book, is very different from the popular Western psychology idea of attachment theory. Those are not the same thing. So like totally different. They just use the same word. But attachment in this sense is being fixated on things happening a very particular way. When there's so much tension wrapped around your craving for things to happen in a very particular way, and that attachment will manifest itself in you trying to control the external environment.
What is the relationship between attachment and wanting and craving? There's a quote from your book that says, if I am always wanting, I have little time for being.
Right. So if you very quickly wanting will sort of snowball into craving, and that craving will very quickly become attachment. And attachment and craving are sources of misery. Like that means that your mind is rippling with tension. Now that's very different from having a goal. Having a goal, having an aspiration, having a purpose, those are beautiful things. Like that's how we created civilization. But it's very important to understand the subtlety that you can move forward towards your goal without causing yourself so much pain. You know that you're moving forward wisely, like what he was talking about in terms of not, working and being detached from the outcome. When you realize that you're moving forward and you are trying to pursue your goal, but then you don't get it, you go back to the drawing board, you try to do some self-analysis and see what you can do better, but you do that without being so upset. You're like, oh, I didn't get it. Oh my gosh, this is so bad. When you're able to work in that manner, you're actually going to be much more efficient, you're going to be much more creative, and you will probably reach your goal faster if you're not constantly stressing yourself out about it.
So that's the way to discern between healthy striving and
Right.
sort of an unhealthy achievement-based identity that we talked about with Ben Holper, remember, the
Yeah.
purpose-based identity, achievement-based, where, I'm not enough unless I achieve, or my value and self-esteem is tied so much to achievement. If you're focused on the process more than the end goal, the win, the money, whatever that is, which you can't control, the only thing you can control is your effort in the process. So it's important that we sort of keep emphasizing that. All right, let's talk about trauma.
Sure.
Who's ready? I am. So how we cope, survive, and tell ourselves stories to endure. Let's talk about trauma and survival mode that you talked about in your book. Many students here have experienced loss, death of a parent or sibling, emotional abuse, loss of their college experience, poverty. And we all have sort of experienced the trauma and disconnection of COVID. How can you tell? Because when you're in survival mode, you don't know you're in survival mode, typically, because you may not have the psychological and emotional tools to help yourself out. When you experience loss of a parent or someone early in life, you're in your teens, you don't know what to do. So how do we tell if we're in survival mode? And what are the telltale signs of that?
I think a lot of it, what I think generally, like how it manifested for me personally, like I can only really speak from my own experience, because people are just so different. So the manifestations of like how you're going to cope with your particular trauma can be, anywhere from like addiction to just like watching way too much TV. I guess it could also be a form of addiction, but it's important to realize that there is that aspect of pleasure. And the avoidance of conflict. I think the conflict within yourself or conflict with other people. I think if you're in survival mode, that means that you're already dealing with so much internally that when some sort of conflict will appear in front of you, you won't be able to go through the process of resolving it. You'll just be like, I'm out. I won't be able to do this. So you find some way to just reason yourself out of it. And I think generally it just looks like you trying your best to live within a bubble that is exactly within your comfort zone. And that will create a situation where you're never really quite growing, because your capacity is smaller when you're in survival mode. You won't be able to do much.
I've talked with a lot of students this semester, and they've shared some of their stories, so when I was in survival mode, and I didn't know it was that until, a girlfriend told me, years later.
Yeah.
Both my parents died when I was a kid, and so my sisters took over sort of raising me.
Yeah.
We were poor, and you just do what you have to do,
right?
Which was get into a good college, get good grades, go to law school, whatever gets you and your family to the next step. And so you don't realize it. You don't realize that you're not living a full life. You're just focused on get the A, get the grade, get to, whatever gets you the job at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and so it's interesting because that time of life was also really efficient. I don't know about you guys, but like you talk about like seeing the goal and being an assassin on it, like just there's nothing that could deter you, but you're also not living emotionally or fully.
There's no presence. You're just going through the moves. And I think this happens to a lot of people where you're just like literally living the life that you think you should be living as opposed to the one that you want to be living. And because the one that you want to be living is risky. It's like, it's not straightforward. There's no clear path. It's a much more high stakes game when you want to live out your genuine aspirations.
Yeah. It's hard to have the emotional tools when you're younger to even know, but there's sometimes when I reflect back, it's like, that was the most efficient, goal-oriented time of mine, not in terms of openness or creativity, but in terms of directness. I need to get from A to B.
Right.
I will get to B no matter what. There's nothing that can stop me. But it's not till later when you have a little bit of more maturity, I guess, that you realize that you were terrible at other things. You were, for men, I don't know, I'm speaking again for myself, we think very, very linearly. Now, let me get through this school, get this job, make this money, then I'll be ready for a partner. When life doesn't move like that.
I think something that you said is really telling, and I think that's something that's sort of switching in the culture right now, where we measure our terms of success by speed, by like how fast we get from this point to that point. And I think a lot of people now are appreciating slow movement, just like slow success, like slow building, like appreciating the tiny steps that eventually add up to a massive mountain. I think that idea of like overnight success, like more people realize, like the same way that that idea of like, you know, money will bring you happiness is sort of like broken. Like we know, like Naval says, like money will solve your money problems, and that's about it. Like good luck with everything else. But similarly, like overnight success, like people hit at it, they build their talent, it takes time. But when you're going in survival mode, like that speed could be really seem successful, but I think the happiest people that I know and the most effective people that I know are not afraid to move slowly.
Yeah, it's just time doesn't seem to be your friend if you were, you know, coming from poverty and your family's in desperate circumstances, or you need to support your family. You know, all those things don't weigh in favor of time. You talked about trauma and identity in a negative way, but what happens when trauma becomes part of your identity and part of your story? How does that inhibit growth, and how can we incorporate trauma into our story as a positive and empowering aspect of our narrative as opposed to a negative part of our story?
Yeah, I think that's one of like the aspects of knowing yourself that takes so much caution and subtlety. Like you want to know yourself profoundly, but do you want to become the story that you're understanding? Not really. You want to allow flexibility into your identity. And a lot of times when people discover like, oh, I actually have a lot of serious trauma connected to a relationship with my mother or with my father, or with whomever, or this person, you know, I received this particular type of abuse from whomever. If that becomes this sort of over like umbrella that covers your sense of identity, then it's going to be really difficult to heal it. Because that becomes the narrative that you sort of form your identity around. That's what your ego is sort of crystallizing itself around. When you understand that you have this trauma point and you can work to relieve it, and then you can move forward from that point and become someone new, then that's a lot healthier. Becoming attached to your story, I think can just be a really limiting thing. And I've seen it happen with a lot of people.
Attached to your story, even if it's a positive story, but if you keep telling the same story, you're inhibiting growth.
It's important to see yourself not as something static. You want to see yourself as something that is flowing, changing. Like you're not a rock, you're a river. Your identity is moving, changing, weaving. Like who you were a year ago, who you were 4 years ago, drastically different. That person fundamentally doesn't even exist anymore. The past version of yourself is totally gone. Your subatomic particles have changed so many trillions of times since that moment that it's gone. It's the past. Like when a lot of people talk about healing themselves, they would conceive of it as going back to the point before the trauma experience happened. But if you're really going to be honest with yourself, there's no going back. There's only moving forward. Like that person is gone. You might as well let yourself evolve into someone new. And I think it's a much healthier way to frame your sense of identity. See it as a river.
That's the third reference, remember this semester, of water, river. Remember the quote from John Guy? Well, there's obviously the Bruce Lee quote, be water. And then Varun was talking about you can never be the same person because the river's different, you're different, everything's different each time you touch your toe. It's interesting to sort of release that, why people who suffer trauma, especially earlier in their lives, are sort of, you know, they're prone to depression, and they go back to that time because that's where security and safety is, or their perception of security and safety is. So they go back to that time. Interesting. Let's talk about self-talk since we're on the story and narrative. How do you practice and control the drunken monkey brain that comes up with all the reasons you aren't good enough, smart enough, experienced enough, that constantly, you wouldn't speak to your worst enemy that way. You wouldn't speak to your friends that way, but you speak to ourselves that way. What are some of the techniques that you've discovered that over time maybe drown out that monkey?
Yeah, I think something that I'm constantly trying to practice is to not fuel the fire. Like if you wake up one day and you're just being super negative, just don't throw more kindling into the fire. Don't be like, yeah, you're right. You know, like it's just let it do its thing, and you'll notice that the mind will just go through its phases a lot more quickly, as opposed to you just like throwing more tension on the tension and just feeding it and feeding it. And that's what happens to a lot of people during their down moments, is that they start believing this like, sort of silly self-analysis that happens when you don't feel good. And then all of a sudden you're like, everything good that I've done is actually not good. It's bad. It sucks. And you just start spiraling. But when you can honor the fact that you're just like, wow, I don't feel good right now. My mind is saying wild things. Let me just treat myself patiently through this day. Let me like activate my support systems. Like, if I don't feel good, I'll make sure to let my wife know. And if she doesn't feel good, she lets me know. And in that way, we can, ask each other, what type of support do you need? And if there's like, oftentimes any sort of emotion will want company. Like, if you're happy, you're experiencing joy, you want to like, help other people also experience that type of joy. But if you feel sad, you're really going to want to make other people feel sad with you. And oftentimes that'll look like jumping through these mental hoops and becoming really illogical, and you're like, oh, this tension is actually your fault, like let me figure out how it's your fault in some way. But when you're aware that when you're moving through a down moment, you can, let the people around you know, and you'll be able to move a little more peacefully, and just like, take some things off of your plate that day if you can, so that you can just let yourself breathe.
So closely related to that is rumination, where you keep spinning either a story or a narrative over and over again. You go back to it. And it can be over people you've hurt or offended, or something that you regret, and you keep replaying it. How do you give yourself, either, even if you've already resolved it with the person,
right,
or spoken your piece to that person, how do you resolve it with yourself and give yourself either that forgiveness or self-compassion?
I think that's like, so it's so funny. So I'm glad that you're asking that, because when I go away to long meditation courses and I'm gone for like 30 days or whatnot, oftentimes when the mind, like when tension is coming up to be released, it'll try to grab some story or another. And oftentimes it'll grab like that same old thing that you actually already apologized for. And that person appreciated your apology, and you've long since moved forward, but still you're like, why did I do that? And you're just hammering away at it. And it's important to understand that there can actually be real resolution, and that memory can just keep coming up. And this goes back to that same thing. Like when you see that coming up, you don't want to fuel that fire. You want to understand that, okay, this tension has arisen, but I'm not necessarily this tension, or this anger has arisen, I'm not it. This, sadness is moving through me, as opposed to I am sad. Like sadness is just moving through. It's passing through and it'll be gone at some point. But any emotion like will try to go through your memory, through your perception, and just find something that will help it fuel itself. And you don't really want to fight the mind, but if you're just, meet that fire with water and just accept, then it won't burn as long as it will.
It's frustrating as hell, though. When you're replaying something, even though you feel it's resolved, it still keeps, it's like a waste of time and energy and memory of your brain. You keep replaying it. I wonder how psychologists or psychiatrists sort of would tell you to stop that cycle, I guess. And what you said is absolutely the right answer. But it doesn't mean it stops. It's just weird. We have all these cues in our life, whether it's where we are, or a song, or where, who knows what brings up these things.
I think the point of success that you can measure when that happens again is, am I facing it with equanimity? Like equanimity as in mental balance, as in you're not hating what's happening in your mind, or you're not craving it and wanting more of it. You're just like, this is another thing that's changing. When you feel that it's just another changing phenomenon, then it'll move, the mind will move on to another form of content.
And when he says he disappears for a month and you're not used to that, it's very disconcerting. So they accepted and they said, yeah, we're in. And then that was in December. And so I contacted them in January to just confirm, it's the end of the semester, remember, I've got planning this way in advance. All you guys are saying, can we get this person? Can we get that person? I'm like, April 20th is taken. And you send them an email and it says, we are out of touch for a month. That's the out of office. Like, we will be back at the end of February. You're like, who leaves? It doesn't even return your calls, but they do that apparently. So that you were gone on that, I suspect.
Totally gone, yeah.
How much could we all use a break from this? And
Oh, it's
how long of a
fantastic.
break
Yeah.
is enough? Not enough forever, but enough to like really make you feel unburdened by it.
It's so amazing to not have your phone. Like if you can, like whether you go on a meditation retreat or not, like spend some time living without your phone. So what Dave is referring to is my wife and I, we went on a 45-day meditation course. It was our first time doing a 45-day course. It's a totally silent retreat for 43 days, and then the last 2 days we start talking again, just so that when we leave the retreat, we're not that weird. And during that time, like when you get there on the night of day 0, you turn in your phone and your laptop or whatever outside communication that you could have. And you let your family members know, obviously in case of emergency, you can call the meditation center, but like, don't call me unless someone's dying. And it's funny because people will struggle with it. Like when I was going away to do this 45-day course, my publisher was like, well, what about like if, like, can we call you? And I'm like, no, you can't. Like, you're not, no one's calling. I'm not even giving you the number. Like, you're not gonna call. But that's something that like my wife and I, we get so much from meditating, and it helps like all other facets of our lives so in such a big way. Like that's my biggest investment, is putting the time into meditating, and that just helps the rest of my life. So we take it really seriously that, yeah, we totally unplug.
Was that the first time you had done something that long? How was it?
It's fantastic.
At what point was it fantastic? And at what point was it like, I don't know if I'm gonna make it?
I think we both felt confident we would make it, but it's challenging. It's really challenging to face yourself for 45 days, but it's extremely worthwhile every time we go in.
So there's no verbal communication? Is there nonverbal?
No. We each saying we're not together. We're like all in our, every individual's in their own room, like single, small little rooms, and we're not like, our eyes are downcast. We're basically like, we don't take robes or anything, but you're like living like a monk for 45 days. And you talk to a teacher, like they're a teacher, someone who's like meditated for like 50 years, will check you twice during those 45 days, like once on day 6 and once on day 26, I think. And they look at you and they're like, everything going okay? And you're like, yep. And I'm like, all right.
Do you say yep or do you just not?
Yeah,
You're allowed to verbalize?
yeah, you can speak. That's the time when you can ask a question if you feel like you have a question.
Shall, do you have a question?
To elaborate on that, like,
Do you speak up?
yeah, what does that experience really look like? You're sitting there, but what's going through your mind as you're there for 45 days? I feel like my mind would be racing initially, but then I stop being able to think of things. No stimulus.
Yeah, so that's a lot of what happens in the retreat, where when you first enter the retreat, your mind is sort of racing, and your mind wants to fight itself and maintain its old habit pattern. And it'll be like, are you sure you don't want to go like on a trip or something? Are you sure you don't want to like watch more like, Amazon's Wheel of Time? Like that was like the show I was watching before the retreat. Or, trying to give you reasons to like get out of there, or just, so that you're not changing it in a big dramatic way. But the mind will start off very loud, and over time it'll calm down. And then there will be some days that are harder than others where it'll get loud again, and a lot of stuff will be coming up. But the practice is the practice where you just bring yourself back to the object of meditation, and you just calmly, patiently, with perseverance, you just keep trying again. You keep trying again. And you don't, in our tradition, in the SN Goenka tradition, you don't just like start, you don't just do a 45-day course. You do a few 10-day courses, and then you do a 20-day course. So you build those mental faculties so that when you do get to the 45-day course, you're very prepared to handle any type of storm that may come up during that time. But it's valuable because everyone's mind has the faculty of equanimity, but you have to build it. You have to, you're literally, when you go into the retreat, it's like going to a mental gym.
And you think about it like a marathon, right? You wouldn't start with a marathon, you start with a 5K, a 10K, probably build from there. How many of you are curious about like a silent retreat? How many
Oh,
of you
nice.
would,
Wow.
how many of you, and is it, how many people want to get away from their phone for a week desperately?
Oh, it's so nice. It sucks when they give you your phone back. You're like, oh, yeah. And you turn it on and then you find out a war is happening. It's like,
And you also find out you didn't miss that much probably.
you didn't know, except the war,
Yeah.
except like
World
when,
events, but like
yeah.
the emails, you go through those and they're like, those aren't that important.
Yeah, and you answer the ones that are, and you know, it was cool. It was like a bit of a nice challenge to make sure that I maintain my pace and I don't just like fall into like what my publisher wants and what blah, blah, and they're just like, you gotta sign this, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. And it's like, all right, let's one thing at a time, you know?
How many, has anyone done a silent retreat before? You want to share it? You have?
I did a kind of short one. It was only 4 days, I think.
Nice.
4 days? That's, and how many of you think you could go 7 days? Would you, 7 days?
Nice.
4 days?
10 days?
10 days in a nice place. And Golden Door is not its location for no reason. Do you have a question? Yeah. Here, take the mic so everyone can hear you. Does it work? No? Speak up loudly.
So like, yeah, I forgot where I heard this quote, but it was like, until you're alone with your thoughts, you don't really know what your thoughts really are. And like, that's the kind of was going through my mind when we were talking about the retreat. Like outside of those settings, like in our day-to-day lives, like, you know, like we have a lot of like, you know, distractions. Like, what are some tips to like achieve like that personal silence where we really know, like, be alone with our thoughts and really evaluate them critically?
I think like bringing yourself back to the present moment gets really overcomplicated. It's literally bringing yourself back to the present moment. You bring yourself back to like what's here and what's happening. I think building up that quality in and of itself, like without having meditation experience, just allowing yourself to feel whatever's happening in that moment, not necessarily with a narrative, but like you can feel whatever emotion is there, or, you know, do that practice of radical honesty with yourself. And that will not only help like break up the mental chatter, but it'll just help you build some type of clarity. Like before I started meditating, I spent a whole year just doing the exact opposite of what I was doing that got me into a lot of trouble, which was like, you know, when I was pursuing pleasure, I was running away from myself. And then I asked myself, what was I running away from? What was I running away from? It was this tension that kept bubbling up. So I would just like literally just put my foot down, experience strong determination, and just let myself sit with all of the discomfort. Yeah.
How do you feel like you successfully transition back into normal life? Like, I feel like personally, when I do like yoga or meditate or that sort of thing, it feels great for a couple minutes, and then real life hits you, and that feeling just kind of goes back in the distance.
Yeah.
How do you feel like, especially like with 40 days being gone, coming back, do you feel like you were able to change and have healthier habits, or does like, how do you successfully transition back?
That's a great question. I think it's quite tough. I think when we're such a culture of speed, like we were mentioning before, where we want that like quick solution, like this one yoga class better make the rest of my day super blissful and nice. Like that's just not how it works. Like this one 10-minute meditation, it better fix everything. Like no, it's just like it literally is just like a gym. So you want to be you want to make sure that you're practicing a technique that actually is giving you results, but you don't want to have these like idea of like miraculous results that it's going to be all perfect and roses after it. But I think setting up your sort of personal system, your boundaries, and letting yourself know like, okay, this is the place where I can be successful if I maintain this environment around me, I think is a lot super supportive of you being like, so for me, that looks like every day I meditate twice a day. And I make sure that no matter what, like wherever I am, whatever the situation is, I meditate twice a day because that's what I need to step forward as a, like, a better version of myself essentially. And that may look different for different people, but, and then, when I come out of the retreat, I think the main thing that I'm sort of looking for is, am I reacting less? If I'm reacting less, then I know that the retreat was successful.
So what meditation technique do you use? Is it guided, unguided? You put on white noise? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's so the meditation technique, it comes from Myanmar. It originates from the Buddhist teaching. It's called Vipassana, and it's taught by S.N. Goenka. The website is dhamma.org. They teach this same technique all over the world, and when you go to the 10-day course, it's basically like a giant guided meditation. So it's not mantra based, or it's not, you're not really imagining anything. You're just observing reality as it is. You start the first 3 days with observing the breath, because that calm and concentrates the mind. And then you take that new level of concentration that you've developed to then just start observing like these tiny minuscule changes that are happening in the body. You start feeling not only like the rougher, sort of denser, grosser parts of the body, but you can feel like the subtleties. Some people will feel like the sort of stream of changing vibrations that are constantly happening in the body, but usually our self-awareness isn't crisp enough to be able to feel such subtlety.
Thank you.
How long do you meditate, Jim?
1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening.
So your pace and what you allow into your world and what you say yes and no to, you probably are practiced at that as well.
Oh yeah,
You are
a lot of no's.
You're
Yeah.
not busy to stay busy.
No. I think that's something that I was really adamant about, where like as soon as you get some like modicum of success, people are just gonna be asking you for so much. Like and they'll be asking for so many different types of things, and often you need to be really clear about what you're like, the direction that you're moving in, so that you're not just burning your energy by saying yes to everything. Like I totally do not agree like with you say yes to every opportunity. Absolutely not. Like you'll be exhausted and you won't be your like best creative self. But by being able to say no and having the strength to say no often, you'll actually find that the opportunities that get you excited and that intuitively connect with you, like when you hit us up, I was like, okay, USC sounds awesome. I have friends in LA. It's been a long time since we've been in LA. So let's just make this happen and see, like, it's an experiment. That's something that I always try to do. It's like, I've never spoken at a university before. If it doesn't go well, I'll never go back. If it does, I'll come back, Yeah.
You're coming back. No, it makes me feel even more, humbled that you accepted our invitation, because I can tell, like, if you're meditating twice a day for an hour and you've got a book, you've got other things, it's a lot. And so, I think you have to be clear. You have to be clear on what are your filters, your philosophy? What are your filters? What are the things that are going to resonate with you that you're more likely to say yes to? And things that don't strike one of those, you can just say, no, I'm not interested, or it's not for me now. I'm not focusing on that now. That's a polite no. And so I think the sooner you can start thinking about those filters and those values, we're just lucky we happen to be in a place that's education, young people, noble service. Like, look, they're not coming because I asked, they're coming because of you. And so it's important for you to understand what you're wasting time on and what you're not. Tony Robbins used to say, don't major in minor things, just stay busy all the time. Our society sort of, honors exhaustion and busyness. That's absurd. I was a lawyer at a big firm. What were my metrics? Hours billed.
Oh.
So imagine my early career. That's all we talked about in the elevator. Hey, I 250 this month. 250. What are you working part-time? Like, that's insane. That's how I was trained.
And you did big law? They call it big
Latham
law.
and Watkins,
Yeah.
the hardest working, highest billing.
You get
Most
paid
profitable
a
firm.
ton, but you don't have a life.
Correct. I would be retiring right now from Latham. And there's times when I'm like, should I have stayed there? One of those things that runs through my head as a rumination, because as my friends retire, and they just say, like, no, they've been to 5 countries, I've been to 7. I get to do the things that I want, I only do the things that I want. They now have that privilege because they have a ton of money.
Yeah.
I've had that privilege all along.
Yeah.
And so as you sort of, your first, your second assignment, remember, was success and value. What metrics do you want to measure your life? If it's purely financial, go work for a hedge fund, go work for Morgan Stanley, go attach yourself to big numbers. But if it's shared experiences, seeing the world, other cultures, service, those are the things you have to decide are your metrics. And those things align with what you give your time to. And those will change over time. They certainly were different when I was 22, 24. I graduated from law school at 23 and was working at a big firm. I wanted to make money, but it took a while for me to untrain myself. If I wasn't working 12, 14 hours a day, I felt like the day was like useless. And still to some extent, like the best privilege you can do, what Jane Ware would say, like a self-determined life where you direct it. And then you have to really say no. So let's talk about trusting the process, because that's also hard to do with your government. Again, the process over the result. You write, do what is right for you. Do it over and over again. Lean into the light. Keep going even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Do not let doubt stop you. Trust the process when your mood is low. Let growth be your mission. Let healing be your reward. Let freedom be your goal. Right. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think there's, that piece in particular reminds me about when I first decided to become a writer, when I felt like, okay, this is something that I should try very seriously. My wife and I had just moved to New York City. This is 2014. And I felt like I should really, really give this a chance. I thought my initial plan was to just try to, go to NYC, work at one nonprofit or another, find some job that was like 40 to 50K. And my intuition was just like, absolutely not, like, don't do that. You want to just spend time honing your craft, figure out your voice as a writer, figure out which themes you really want to dive into, and keep healing yourself, like keep going on this journey. And I got really scared because I knew that was like a very high risk situation. And I asked my wife, I was like, I think I should try to do this writing thing. She had very quickly, my wife is like, she's amazing. She's super smart. She very quickly got a job. She's a biology major, got a job as a scientist. And I like very sheepishly asked her, I was like, do you think you can give me time? Like, I need time. I need time to figure out if writing could be a real thing for us. I was like, if it works, then, and I write something that's actually really good, a book that, people want to read and share with their friends, and that could be huge for us. If I fail, then I'll very happily go become a history teacher in high school. And she said, okay. So that was like the big moment, but I knew that was just like a very high risk situation because not everyone's successful. And but a lot of people who stick to it and they stick to it for the long haul, they are. Like, I think one thing that was hard to watch was like, as the Instagram writing community became bigger and bigger, there were some people who were fire. They were just incredible writers. They would write the most thought-provoking, beautiful things. And then one day they stopped. They would just stop. And I'm like, if this person kept going, they would be huge. They would also be New York Times bestsellers. And I think that was one of the things that ended up working out for me was like, I, faced those first 3 years that were just such a slow climb. Like, nothing was happening. Nobody was hitting me up in the email. Nobody was asking for anything. It was just like me trying to figure out my voice as a writer. And then eventually it like slowly started changing and we got some traction and I, figured out how to connect with my audience better. And then it just started blowing up. Yeah.
I'm smiling because I think of that, as an entrepreneur or just as a creative person, 3 years of just
Nothing.
And succeeding in writing is not only like a high risk proposition, not many people make money out of it or a living out of it, but focusing on your craft, the process. Every great performer that has sat in this chair, from Kobe Bryant to Misty Copeland to Pete, Gary Vaynerchuk, all they talk about is practice and honing your craft. That's where we make us. That's where we make ourselves. And so trusting that process when it's hard, especially when it's hard, as you say, that's the discipline. That is, and if you can enjoy that process, you probably, what do they say? No one likes writing, but everyone likes having written. Is that true, or is that just a sort of a pithy quote? Enjoy writing?
I like it. It's fun. It's kind of like I'm like solving a puzzle. Like I have a feeling of like what I want to say, and then I'll, write a few lines, and then I'll just kind of keep working at it, and then at one point it'll be like click, and then it's good enough to put out there. The other thing is that you don't want to get caught in the editing trap where you're just like, you can constantly keep changing words. At one point, just like send it out there, be bold, put it out there and see what the response is.
Nothing is ever perfect in business or in writing.
Mhm.
When did you and Sarah sort of have that first indication that, oh, we're on to something? Like what was the feedback, or was it the sale of the first book? Tell us sort of when you had that moment of like, I could be a writer.
So I was adamant that I wanted to self-publish the first book. I was like, I really want to do it my way. I don't trust any editors or anything like that. Now I really do, like, editors are fantastic. But I just didn't know. I wanted to create my own thing. So when I self-published inward, I think I had like 70,000 followers, a good amount, but not anything like stellar or huge. And we ended up selling 12,000 copies in 6 months. And I for each book I made like $5 and I made $60,000. I was like, holy shit, like we did it, like we made money. Like this is like starting to happen. And people were loving the book, and a book deal came where they wanted to release a revised version of it and have it in bookstores everywhere, because initially, if it's self-published, you can only really buy it offline. But when it not only, because like I knew that people were connecting with the material and they liked it because the Instagram account was growing, but there was no revenue from that, right? And when the book came out and it actually started selling, that was like a big surprise and affirmation that I should keep going.
You're gonna make a lot of money now. It's gonna be really fun. We got him early. We're lucky. His fee's going a lot higher, and it's gonna be amazing to watch where he appears. And don't be surprised to see him on, the podcasts and the shows. It's a unique cultural moment, and your voice is unique and needed. Questions, guys? I'm gonna keep asking. This is the best therapy I've ever had.
When you spent all your time writing your book, how did you get through any sort of like doubt or any judgment for, I don't know, you said it was a pretty big gamble. Like, how did you get through that?
It was hard, man. It was hard. Like, there was so much doubt. Like, I worried that I was being so foolish. And I think it was really just the gnawing intuition that this was definitely worth my time. That even if I felt like I was just, being way too risky, because it felt super risky, to forfeit like a sort of a more common career path and choose this. It just constantly, like, I was worried that whole time. Those first 3 years, it felt so daunting, but I just had that energy to keep trying, to keep going, to keep sort of going back to the drawing board and figuring out like the art of subtracting words. Like that was, personally as a writer, it was just like, looking at a piece and being like, okay, this word isn't necessary, that word's not necessary, and just like cutting things down into a minimalistic format, especially because I knew during those like heydays of the Instagram era, attention is so precious that you only have this tiny like millisecond to connect with someone. So I thought, okay, that's when I figured out black and white is the best way to go, because everything else on Instagram is super colorful that the black and white almost sort of catches you off guard. You're like, what's happening here? And it's more easy for the mind to digest it. When I realized that and found that format, that's when things really started just spreading much faster, but it was hard. I just had to kind of set aside the doubt, but it would constantly come up, and it still comes up. Like every time I write a book, like I just finished writing my third book, Lighter, that Dave mentioned is coming out later this year. And the whole time I was like, oh, this sucks. Like, I'm like, this is not a good idea. Like I shouldn't write a nonfiction book. But all I can really do is put my best forward. And if people find that useful, like that's always my sort of my mission is like, can I make something that other people find useful? And when I do that, then I know I'm being successful. Yeah.
Questions, raise your hand. Alex, you can give him the mic. Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Unless you're gonna speak up very loudly.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Louder, here, hand the mic.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Julia. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Julia.
I'm grappling with my own writing journey and
Yeah.
confidence, and that kind of feeling of like the edge of a cliff of you make a decision now that you're committing to this craft that is like you either do it or you don't. And I want to have both because I'm scared, but I also don't feel like my voice is fully crystallized or worthy of sharing it. So how do you protect that practice, but also give yourself space to grow?
I think we live in a really unique time where there is space for artists and creators to evolve publicly. And that's, I think, a little bit different from before, where you can, start off with a particular type of music and then, go into branch off into other areas. But the same goes for writers. Like, I'm actually really happy that I had from the very beginning that like constant sort of feedback between my audience. Like I wouldn't always take very seriously what they said. I would just get my own sense of like, if I felt like there was a lot of excitement from people and a lot of sharing from people, then there's some connection there in the piece. And I would try to figure out which 15% of myself is the best part to show, because like as an individual, we all have so many different talents, different forms of expertise, different parts of ourselves that we're really excited about and that bring us a lot of fulfillment. But then I realized like, okay, like no one wants to hear my like sort of like historical analysis or political theory, because like I love reading about politics, I love history, but those aren't like my real strong suits. Like what I should focus on is trying to bring forward inspiration in the healing journey, to write reflective things so other people can develop their sense of self-awareness, whether they've had a therapist or whether they've never seen a therapist or whether they've never meditated before, but finding that space within you that you want to share. Like I think that's really pretty critical. But I think it's fine and pretty helpful to share publicly, but you don't want to take the negativity seriously. You don't want to take the numbers too seriously as well. It's more so like the thoughtful few pieces or comments that some people may give you, like that show you like you're actually on the right track. Yeah, but it helps to get that, because then you can make more iterations of like what your voice should really become. And it's difficult, and you find that balance between like, okay, you can figure out how to make a hit, but then you also want to maintain your integrity and still put things out there that may not be as popular, but are really important to you. Yeah.
Some good advice from entrepreneurs. That one of the best things I've ever heard in this room, whether you're an entrepreneur or a writer, which is entrepreneurial, until you do it, you'll never know how good you are.
Yeah. In the blue.
Yeah, I was just, thank you for coming. I was just curious your perspective on being self-aware, doing the work, digging deep, that type of thing, but not letting it manifest into a perfectionism thing.
Yeah.
And because that obviously becomes exhausting.
Yeah. If you're striving for like, this is such an important question, because the idea of the middle path, I think, can be applied to all areas of life. Like in your relationships, you should be trying to find a middle path. In the way that you perceive your personal development, there should be a sense of middle path. Like you should be able to appreciate your imperfections and at the same time simultaneously understand like, yeah, these are different areas that I can develop in, that I can work in. But if you find that perfectionism starts creeping in, it's just another form of attachment. That's just another form of you trying to like grip this changing reality and control it, when in reality, there's no way for you to control it because it's changing so fast. And there's just too many factors for you to really get a good grip on all of it. But letting go of that sense of perfectionism and finding what is your, like, what are your metrics to be able to assess yourself that you're really taking steps forward. Like for me, it's that sense of not constantly reacting and not constantly falling into like creating these narratives that aren't that are just like fueling my tension. When I'm just like observing emotions and feeling them pass as another changing phenomenon, then I know that, you know, I'm moving in a good direction because I'm causing myself a lot less misery. But yeah, that sweet spot of like allowing yourself to grow, but also just appreciating where you're at right now. Like acceptance is the biggest propellant of growth. When you can just accept where you are, like that's how you actually let go. Like acceptance equals letting go.
Question, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead. She was holding her hand up, go ahead. Sorry to put it.
Earlier you mentioned like we should act on what we want to do versus what society or like others want us to do. But like when we're always surrounded by other people on social media, I feel like, at least personally, it's hard for me to distinguish like what I really want from what I've been like influenced and told to want. So how do you separate that and really figure that out, especially like while we're young, like indecisive?
Yeah, and I think that's where silence comes in. Like whether you meditate or not, like going hiking, spending time alone, taking a trip alone, creating environments where you get to be in some sort of solitude, even if it's for a day or a few days or a few hours, you're not constantly being like told what to think. You're not constantly consuming. If you can create space for yourself to not consume, then it's going to be easier for you to listen to your intuition. It's going to be easier for you to kind of separate the muck from what's real. But I think having that space to like go out there and just be alone can be really, really clarifying. And it's hard, you know, at the same time, like if you want to like go into finance, like do it, like, but make sure that that's what you actually want, not just like what your parents wanted you to do, or, you know, because if you're like genuinely excited about it and then you start doing it and you find that that excitement hasn't gone and it's still there, then you're totally, you know, going in a good direction. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. I just wanted to like circle back to what you were discussing earlier about trauma. And thank you for opening up about like your own story and experience with poverty.
Thank you.
I feel like sometimes there's more subtle things like generational trauma or
Yeah.
like subtle learned behavior that isn't at the forefront of our minds, but are nonetheless important things that we have to let go of. I was just wondering if you had any experience kind of letting go of more subtle traumas that remain hidden, and how you kind of allowed those things to come to light, whereas some more apparent traumas are things that we can easily focus on. There are a lot of hidden things that we don't necessarily have time for or dedicate time to.
Yeah, I love that question. That's a, you know, I don't really often talk about this, but I think when I did my first silent 10-day course, I hadn't really spent too much time thinking about this, about how it affected me personally, but I've obviously read it in history so many times, but I could feel that there was this sense of survival in me that emanated from the genocide that my ancestors went through in Latin America. Like I'm primarily indigenous. There's definitely some European blood in me. I've never gotten one of those, you know, tests done. But I can feel the struggle that indigeneity went through, and it felt like horror. And it was so strange. Like I've never really, you know, felt that before. But I could feel that there was so much sadness in having experienced something that traumatic, and also the sense of victory that like we're still here. You know, we're here, we're surviving, and we're like, you know, Latin America has become this like powerful space in the world that's becoming more and more vibrant. But that was like a subtle form of trauma that was actually really deep, but I was totally oblivious to. And I think it's something that we're like constantly discovering because we don't always know our points of tension until a situation will illuminate them. And I think that's why like relationships are so powerful when there's that like one-on-one intimate connection, like it gets really hard because so much of your attachments are illuminated really rapidly. That's why people will, repel from each other.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. Can you hear me
Yeah.
all right? Earlier, we were talking about kind of the importance of being away from your phone and social media and watching. Being a part of a generation where most people, especially now that we're graduating, are likely to communicate or stay connected via Instagram or Facebook or Snapchat or messaging. How do you recommend kind of striking the balance of still being in the circle of things where you are still connected to the people you used to see, but also not getting trapped into the unrealistic world of social media that does not depict normal life?
It's tough. It's like one of the hardest battles that we all face. I think like our generation, like we've been given this massive problem, and we're the ones that are going to solve it. And then that happens a lot, right? We invent a new technology until we don't understand the like externalities and the repercussions that are going to come from it. I personally try my best to understand the relationship between consuming information, like even something as subtle as like a simple video or a meme or something like that. Like any data that you put into your mind will burn energy. Like it will consume some sort of energy. So if you find you're scrolling for an hour or two, then like you'll be really tired afterwards because you were just taking in all this data and your mind is processing it. So being aware that all the information that I put in will consume my energy and make me tired, makes me try to be a lot more tactical about like, okay, let me respond to my text messages, let me look through the emails I need to look through, let me post my daily posts on Instagram, and then let me put my phone down and just like leave it down. And it's a pretty constant battle, but like I love the timer that has been added to IG, which like it lets me know like after an hour passes or an hour and a half passes, it's like, you gotta chill, so that you're not on there all the time. But I think that same day, the same way that that we need that sense of being alone, I think it's like something that I would like to add to my life is just like having at least one day during the week where I'm just like not on the phone. And it's so funny listening to the stories of like how it used to be in the early 90s or late 90s before cell phones really started texting or becoming that popular, where people would like call each other and friends would decide like, okay, we're going to meet up at this place at 6 o'clock and then we're all going to go to the movies together. And they would do that. They would like meet up they would make a plan the day before, and then like there's nobody nowadays. People are like an hour before you're supposed to be there, like, are we still doing this? Like, is this still happening? Like, there was none of that. So there's like a little loss of that magic of life. But I think, yeah, we have to find a way to navigate that addiction that social media and the phone is trying to feed. It's dangerous. Yeah.
Do you ever worry? Have you worried in the past about not managing to escape poverty early enough to help your parents and your family before they pass away or get too old? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, that was always like a really scary thought because I saw how hard my parents worked for me, my brother, and my sister, and how like it was just a trap. There was just no way out of it. They were in this cycle of poverty. Every single month, it was hard to pay the rent. And every single month, they had to be really strategic about what they bought so that we can all, be fed. And watching that and knowing that the only way out for them was me, my brother, and my sister. And I think I always felt that that sense of debt, like I really want to do my best for my parents because they've given me so much, and not in the sense that like I owe them, but in the sense that like I love them so much, like they struggled so hard and put themselves in a really difficult situation where like them coming to the United States, they knew there was no way out of poverty for them. They knew that it was always going to be hard, but that there was a chance. Like they were almost like, it was almost like a lottery, and I think back to that time period with the people that I grew up with in my neighborhood, there were so many bright people, but a lot of them got stuck in the cycle of poverty, and not because they didn't work hard, they're working their asses off. It's just that there wasn't that type of opportunity, or like, for example, when I went to high school in Boston at the time, if you were Latinx, there was a 50% chance that you would graduate from high school. Like, that was crazy, like 50% chance, like that's it. And as I was moving through high school, people were dropping like flies. Like it was just, they were disappearing left and right. But I was always pretty afraid of that. And that was one of the reasons why I knew that it was worthwhile for me to try to take a bigger risk and try to develop myself as an artist, because if I am successful, then I'll be able to help my parents. Yeah.
You said earlier, acceptance is the biggest component of growth. From my own personal acceptance, I feel like a lot of my own fears, internal motivation is our lack thereof self-acceptance. So I kind of go back and forth between staying in the mindset that that's what I was talking about earlier, that like, emotionless, like just grind to die and like get your shit done mindset versus like doing what I actually want to do. So like, what is there a time that I'll go back and go, wow, we should have done this, that, and then some, or like do you think that there's a way to like get to a realization to have that, or do you think require that through meditation? Something like that?
Well, meditation is always helpful. I think like, even if you want to develop like a really, a smaller, sort of more easily accessible practice, like, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, that's really important, because that's going to give your mind that sense of stability that technology is trying to like throw you off of, with like the way we communicate with, the way that we get bombarded with information, like developing that sense of stability and that sense of equanimity is critical. But I think it's hard. Do you think can you pose your question again? Yeah.
I feel like
Can you speak up a little bit louder?
sorry, going back and forth between choosing like material success or emotional success.
Yeah.
And I feel like I take energy from investing in myself emotionally, and that into investing into myself like monetarily.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is like, is there ever going to be a point where I realize that I messed up? Like, how could I come back?
I think like the happiest people that I know like got themselves to a point where they definitely were able to make their immediate needs met. And like I'm thinking of a lot of the people that that I look up to that are, spend their times as meditation teachers, but they've never written a book, or they're not, they're not wealthy in any type of way. But these are the happiest people where they have taken the energy that they could have put into like just becoming really wealthy, and they've put that into self-fulfillment and getting to know themselves. And they've been able to like, have beautiful lives. They're not like constantly going on trips or like living these sort of like Instagram lives, but they're like, they have this profound peace, like incredible wisdom. Like I think like probably one of the wisest people that I know like lives in the middle of nowhere in Idaho and lives just literally the simplest life imaginable. He's never written a book, has no social media, like he just, takes care of his family and spends a lot of time teaching meditation courses and sitting meditation courses. And I think that's like a great way to live. Like when I think about myself, one thing that I personally want to avoid is just like making money for the sake of money. Like, dude, like when I have enough and I can take care of my parents and like I don't need to write 80 books. right? Like if I write like 7 or 9 really great ones and I feel really good about them, then fantastic. I can stop and just like try to manage the money that I have acquired well. And then like I don't need to be a billionaire, you know, like I don't need $100 million. Like I just need to be able to meet my responsibilities as a householder and take care of my family well and make sure that I have enough also to be able to give back to others who are less fortunate. And like that's good. Like, yeah.
I don't want to make it sound through the class or comments about having a finance career, whatever career, or lawyer is somehow not the path. It's what you find meaningful to you. And if you can find meaning and purpose in what you're doing and enjoy it, if you can enjoy it, then home run. And if you can enjoy it and make money, grand slam, home run. You know, I'm not as sort of profound and deep as some of his teachings, but if you can make money in the world to the point where you have flexibility and optionality and freedom, that's really what the money is for. It's for freedom. So that you know, when your friends call you, when you're 34 years old, they're like, we're going to Thailand for a month. You're like, I can't afford it. Or security when you're older, or parents, family security, all those things. So a side helping of financial success is good, if that's one of the things that you value. And coming out of a school like this, if you have student debt, or coming like I had student debt, like it was a necessity. Your family may make it a necessity.
And
Go ahead.
I think even like with what you're asking, like you can find a middle path in there. You know, you can totally find a middle path where you're like, okay, how am I spreading my energy out? Like, yeah, let me meet my material needs. Like that we live in a capitalist society. Even if we want to change that, we still have to figure out how to meet the conditions of our time to be able to live. So yeah, you do have to take care of your responsibilities, but at the same time, like your sense of fulfillment is really important. Your development as a human being is like critical, because that's what's going to add to your peace and your happiness. And if you don't have that, what's the point of having like all this money? But I think it's also beautiful, like in the Vipassana tradition that I'm a part of, like there are people who are teachers that are, you know, were third grade teachers their whole lives. And then there are other people who are like doctors, like, do you know Yuval Noah Harari, the guy who wrote *Sapiens*? He's also in the same Vipassana tradition, and he ended up like following his sort of aspiration to try to write these like big history books that encompass the entirety of human history. And he became like a crazy multimillionaire by accident. Like he wasn't like intending to do that. And now I think it's so beautiful when like people, okay, you may have intentionally built wealth, or you may have accidentally stumbled into wealth, but then you're thinking about how can I use that and leverage that to try to improve the world, to try to give back in some way, to make some sort of social impact. And it only takes so much to take care of your family, and whatever's, you know, after that, you try to really help a lot of people.
Most people chasing money will not get it. If you're chasing money, if you're chasing betterment and improvement and all the other things will lead to that and purpose, you'll make more money, you'll be more effective, and the statistics and the data shows that you'll make more money over time. So the fact that you all, and you in particular, are working on becoming more emotionally aware, it will only serve you across all parts of your life. That's the idea of this course of flourishing. It's not just for relationships, it should be for everything. So that's why he's here. Keep going, keep them going. Quick ones, Kim.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I had a question about kind of like certainty. I think in my own personal life, I used to my mom like, Mom, but I don't know what job I'm gonna have or this or what. And then she's like, you're 19, relax. But I think I've seen it in my life and a lot of other people's life. Of course, there's things that you can't plan for, you know, tragedy and loss and pandemics and things like that. And I think I have this terrible fear that like, oh no, what if I don't get the success that I want, or the job that I want, or the favor that I want, or whatever it is that I'm worrying about, because something unexpected is going to come my way.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's a two-part question: is one, how you manage those thoughts, of those worries of things you can't control, and two, God forbid something does happen that you're faced with those things. How do you navigate those situations?
Well, it's going to happen. That's life. Life is ups and downs. So the thing that you don't want to happen is at some point, like not specifically that thing, but some difficult thing, like someone who you really deeply love is important in your life. Like they, you know, grandparents pass away, parents pass away, friends pass away. Like the longer that you live, these sorrows arise. Now, when you know that they will come, what can you do? You gotta prepare yourself. You gotta be able to, develop your sense of equanimity and your ability to become that person in your group where you can grieve and bear the loss and accept it. But then because you have so much internal fortitude and you're so connected with your emotions and you're able to have equanimity, you can be that pillar that other people can also lean on. That and that's something that was really interesting. Like a few weeks ago, my grandmother passed away. She was 96 years old, like, lived this really long life. And it's terribly sad she passed away, but at the same time, my wife and I got to go to Ecuador, with my mom and dad and my brother and be with the family. But when I asked myself, like, yes, it was sad that I'm no longer going to be able to see my grandmother, but I'm also like happy that I even had time with her. And I felt much more in a position to like support my mom and dad, to support other family members. But I would not have been able to do that if I hadn't taken the time to cultivate my understanding of impermanence. Like people suffer in life because they reject impermanence. They reject the fact that things are going to change. Like success is not like a linear thing. Like you may be so successful for a while and then boom, it's just gone, or you may have this incredible situation or a loved one and then boom, it ends. So understanding that endings will happen and you take the time to, either work with a therapist or develop a meditation practice or cultivate yourself internally so that you can meet the changing moments of your life with a sense of acceptance as opposed to fighting it, because it's bound to change. It's going to change. Life is full of ups and downs, but our energy is really well used if we try to prepare ourselves for them. The happiest people that I know, the most peaceful people that I know, are constantly embracing impermanence. That's tough.
Once you make that decision to put your phone away, like I'm gonna like face my emotions, like what are some tips that you have to do that? Like, would you journal? Like, where would you start once you decide that you don't want to like avoid like
I think one of the nicest ways to start entering that space is like when I lived in New York City, I think one of the most nourishing times was when I would ride my bike through Prospect Park. And I would really intentionally try not to be on my phone, to just be taking in what's happening around me. Other people definitely find it through journaling, and you can sort of connect with intuitively what feels good for you, but just being able to enter a space with presence. Like sometimes when I want to put my phone down, what I want to do is just spend really intentional time with my wife or with my brother. Let's talk for hours, let's really connect. And that can be just as beautiful as walking through nature or spending time with yourself and reflecting and journaling. Missing those opportunities of connection, the human connection that we get through social media is really powerful. It's helping, it's doing a lot of things, but it's negatively affecting society, but it's also pushing society forward. We would not have been able to have Black Lives Matters without social media, or the Me Too movement, things that are really, just this pushing against patriarchy. Social media has helped bring that forward, help move society forward. But I think the most beautiful aspects of connection happen in person, like us, Yeah.
Couple more, keep them going.
So you mentioned a lot about being honest with yourself, and I think I've realized recently that being honest with myself, a lot of things have been really simple. It's been advice that people have been telling me all along, and I think I feel sometimes really stupid that I haven't realized it earlier, or for advice that I've heard from people that I find logically it does make sense to me, but it's very hard emotionally to accept for myself.
Yeah.
And I end up beating myself up a lot about it. How do you work on navigating to give yourself that self-compassion, to just give yourself a break so that you can actually grow?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think that happens a lot when you start turning your lens inward, and you may have seen the meme 1,000 times, like that's saying this like really straightforward, like thing that takes you so long to connect with inside of yourself, and you realize that the truth that you were looking for is really simple, like this acceptance. Like acceptance is the path to growth. Like acceptance helps you let go. And so much of becoming the best version of yourself is actually accepting what's happening right now. And that seems so simple, but it's so hard to do. Like it takes a lot of intentional habit building and coming back to those difficult emotions to actually be able to do that. But when you start navigating that inner forest, when you start being able to see that difficult terrain and those tough aspects of your emotional history, you start understanding that the human experience is like not unique to you. You start seeing that like, okay, this difficulty that I'm facing, the people around me are also facing. So you quickly start developing that self-compassion, and you start being much more gentle with whatever it is that you're learning or that you're having trouble learning. And then very beautifully that starts flowing outward. Like that's when you know that you're really growing, when you're developing that self-compassion, and when you start much more easily feeling that compassion for other people and treating them gently as well. But it's hard, and it's funny because like the deepest, like with the things that I write about, like I'm not necessarily writing about anything new. I'm just sharing my perspective on it. And each individual's perspective is valid. Like, your perspectives on impermanence are totally valid. Your perspective on relationships are also valid. But that it's not necessarily like you have to like create a new idea. So like a lot of the things that you understand when you're navigating your internal terrain are like these sort of straightforward things that are very hard to accept and live.
I want to be respectful of his time. One of the agreements that I made was we would get him out at 7:50. So I want to cut off questions. What I would say is
Time flew by.
it's a lot. And what I would say is, if you haven't picked up the book, grab it. It really is, it's a very quick read, but it's something that you revisit because it's easy to digest. One of the things that I sort of want to close on is taking risk and fulfillment. You wrote that walking the uncommon path is not a certain victory, but it does provide the greatest possibility for fulfillment. Can you just sort of give us some comments on that?
I think it's hard. And I think like when you're young, when you're like in your 20s and your 30s, like that is a period for you to get to know yourself. And that is totally a period for you to work hard on the things. Like if you're lucky enough to work hard on what you love, like you're already one of the most fortunate people in the world. It's like a lot of people do not have that opportunity to like work on the thing that gets you super excited. Like a lot of people around the world are working to live, to exist in the next day. And a lot of us here in the United States, I mean, the United States is super unbalanced, but a lot of us here are fortunate enough to be able to like try to fulfill these deeper aspirations. So it's totally fine to work hard towards them, but it's risky. Like it's not always going to work out. And I think it's also fine to realize that like, I think like I love that right now I'm working as a writer, but I don't know if I'm always going to be a writer. Like something else may manifest. And even when I started turning my attention into building this fund with my friends Bradley and Irene, I got so excited and I did not see that coming. Like, we're like, okay, like how can we sort of make a bigger impact in the world? Like, can we actually try to help support future platforms that have the well-being of individuals in mind, that people will be able to create products that are compassionately designed. Like, can we find founders that are actually trying to do these things? And, we decided, okay, let's try to build a fund and, raise this money and then deploy that money in supporting people to create healthier products for the next decade. We're talking like from well-being companies to like future social media companies, platforms that are very intentionally meant to be compassionate so that there's no shady stuff going on in the background. Like what I hope to see is like we all use Instagram, right? Not because we like it, but because there's no alternative. So if we were able to create something that was still fun, that supported us in connecting each other, but at the same time wasn't trying to make us addicted, wasn't increasing our depression, wasn't making us more lonely, then that would be incredible, right? And it's totally possible, but it felt super risky, like, is this even possible? And we've been, working on this project for a number of months, and there are people who are totally down, and we tell them our vision of sort of compassionate design and supporting the well-being of people by creating these like strong, potent platforms. Some people are not about it, and other people get really fired up about it, and it feels risky, but intuitively it felt like, let's go for it. So I feel like if your intuition says yes, if you have the energy for it, and you're lucky enough to really give yourself time to do it, you gotta go for it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's, a lot of us are fortunate enough to then pivot and work in another area. But I think since a lot of us are young enough to, we should allow ourselves the space to take a risk.
And you've got more flexibility and safety net than you even think, I hate to keep repeating it, but if you're here, no matter how you got here, you are already tremendously lucky to have this education, this opportunity, this network, no matter where you came from. Yesterday I was in Havana, Cuba, and I was. And it's just, has anyone been to Cuba before? How recently?
3 times. Last time was 2018.
Okay, how recently?
28.
So the difference, I went 10 years ago, and now it's stark. There are no tourists. The comment, Obama opened up normalized relations, and it really was booming, and they're opening hotels. There's no one there. There's no music. There's no people in the squares. There are maybe 5 to 10 private restaurants in the whole city of 2.2 million people. It's changed so much, and they have monthly ration, $80 a month you make. That's what you make, no matter what you do. Maybe police and doctors make a little bit more. People in tourism make more than everybody. They quit their jobs as engineers and doctors and lawyers. It's just a different place, 90 miles away from the US. Anyway, not to get on the soapbox, but just you're already in this position. You have a responsibility to pay it forward and do things that open the door for other people. Being your first time here, being your first time in front of a college audience, we need to set the bar pretty high. Even we gotta have him come back often and show him how we do it at USC. So he's given us so many things to think about. This book, honestly, like if you look at my book, there are more pages dog-eared and marked than not with notes. So what are the things that you are going to take away from today's talk and take with you after you graduate from USC? We want to hear from you. I'm going to record this and give this to you. Ready? Who's ready? Lessons from Diego. Ready? I'm going to cut this out first. Go.
Move forward wisely, don't cost yourself pain.
Say no and say it often.
Let freedom be your goal.
Allow flexibility is good. Identity felt static.
Reclaim your power.
Acceptance equals letting go. Follow the middle path. Don't go with it.
Reject the idea of impermanence.
Coming around.
Practice equanimity.
Allow yourself to ignorance. Don't attach yourself to your story.
Money will only solve money problems.
You're not a rock hero. You're not a rock hero.
Good one.
Most effective people are not afraid to move slowly.
Listen to your own pace.
Be the pillar others can lean on.
The idea of middle path can be applied to all aspects of life. The time is you want to see yourself as something growing and not stagnant.
Utilize your support system.
Really gets me. Activate your support system. Acceptance is the biggest problem for us.
Let's hear it for Diego. We promised we would get him on here. He has to run. Awesome class, great questions. Next week, we celebrate. Come back, fight on, see you next week.